When a locomotive becomes too powerful for the rails beneath it, railroads face an impossible choice: build stronger infrastructure or ban the beast entirely. Today, we are counting down 20 old freight locomotives that were banned, restricted, or exiled because their raw power overwhelmed the railroads that created them. The Reading Railroad's T1 class 484 locomotives were engineering marvels that became engineering nightmares on the very lines they were built to serve. Built between 1945 and 1947, these 4,600 horsepower Northerns were designed to haul heavy anthracite coal trains through the rugged mountains of Pennsylvania. But here is where things got complicated. The T1 locomotives weighed over 450,000 pounds each, and their 70-inch driving wheels delivered hammer-blow forces that literally shook bridges apart. Reading quickly discovered that these monsters could not operate on most of their branch lines without expensive infrastructure upgrades that the railroad simply could not afford. The axle loading exceeded what many older bridges and lighter rail could safely handle. Within a decade, all 30 T1 locomotives were restricted to mainline duty only, permanently banned from secondary routes that desperately needed their tremendous hauling power. The irony was devastating. Reading had built these locomotives specifically for the coal traffic that ran primarily on those very branch lines they were now forbidden to use. By 1963, every single T1 had been scrapped. They had spent half their service lives forbidden from running where they were needed most. The Duluth, Misabe, and Iron Range Railway operated some of the heaviest trains in North America, hauling iron ore from Minnesota's massive mines to Lake Superior ports for shipment to steel mills. Their Yellowstone 2884 locomotives were purpose-built monsters, weighing over 1.1 million pounds with their tenders. These enormous behemoths could generate 140,000 pounds of tractive effort, enough to move 18,000-ton ore trains across the rugged terrain. But here is the thing. That kind of power came with a brutal cost to their operational flexibility. The Yellowstones were so incredibly heavy that they were permanently banned from every other railroad except the Iron Range lines themselves. No other road could accept them in interchange service. Their 72,000-pound axle loads would have crushed standard North American track construction. The DM&IR had to build special bridges, reinforce curves, and maintain extra heavy 136-pound rail just for these locomotives to operate safely. When dieselization came in the 1960s, the Yellowstones could not escape to other railroads like other surplus steam power often did. They were prisoners of their own specialized infrastructure, scrapped in place because no one else could run them. The Chesapeake and Ohio H8 Allegheny class represented absolute power in articulated locomotive form. Built from 1941 to 1948, these magnificent 2666 locomotives were the most powerful steam locomotives ever operated in regular service anywhere in the world, developing nearly 8,000 indicated horsepower at speed. But that incredible power came with operational restrictions that severely limited their usefulness across the railroad's entire network. The Alleghenies weighed 778,000 pounds without their tenders, creating axle loadings that banned them from most Chesapeake and Ohio branch lines where coal was actually loaded at the mines. They were confined to the railroad's heaviest-built mainline segments between Hinton, West Virginia, and Clifton Forge, Virginia, where track could handle their weight. Even on those approved routes, speed restrictions applied constantly. The massive reciprocating forces from their 6 enormous driving axles created hammer-blow effects that could damage rail and roadbed at higher speeds. Chesapeake and Ohio limited them to just 45 miles per hour, despite their theoretical capability for much faster running. The railroad built only 60 of these magnificent machines, and all were scrapped by 1956 when dieselization arrived. Union Pacific's Challenger class 4664 locomotives were revolutionary when they debuted in 1936. They could haul 3,600-ton trains at 70 miles per hour, something no previous articulated locomotive could ever dream of achieving at such speeds. Union Pacific eventually rostered 252 of these powerful machines, making them one of the most successful articulated locomotive designs in American railroad history. But here is the catch that historians often overlook. The Challengers were banned from significant portions of Union Pacific's own network. Their axle loading of 67,500 pounds and a length of 121 feet with tender-prohibited operation on numerous branch lines and secondary main lines across the system. Many turntables throughout the railroad simply could not accommodate them. The railroad was forced to maintain entirely separate locomotive pools for different territory. Challengers that wandered onto restricted trackage faced serious derailment risks on bridges and curves not engineered for their weight and length. Even today, the preserved Challenger 3985 faces route restrictions during excursion runs. Modern track crews carefully evaluate every bridge and every curve before allowing this £1.1 million locomotive to pass over the rails. The Norfolk and Western's Y6B Class 2882 compound mallets were the last steam locomotives built in the United States for domestic railroad use. Number 2200 rolled out of Roanoke shops in April 1952, and these £583,000 locomotives generated an astonishing 170,000 pounds of tractive effort with their booster valves engaged at low speeds. That made them incredibly effective coal haulers, some of the best ever built for the demanding Appalachian terrain and steep mountain grades. Too effective, actually. The Y6B locomotives were so heavy and powerful that they were banned from nearly all of Norfolk and Western's branch lines where coal was actually loaded at the mine tipples. Their operation was restricted to the heaviest built mainline segments only. The railroad had to maintain constant vigilance about bridge weight limits and track conditions everywhere these locomotives operated. Even simple switching movements required careful planning because the Y6B locomotives could easily damage lighter yard trackage with their massive weight. When Norfolk and Western finally dieselized in 1960, the Y6B locomotives could not be sold to other railroads. Their specialized nature and heavy weight made them completely unmarketable. Every single one was scrapped. The Central Railroad of New Jersey operated unique Camelback locomotives that placed the engineer's cab atop the boiler itself, in a bizarre arrangement. These strange-looking machines were designed to burn cheap anthracite column, the waste coal that accumulated near Pennsylvania mines. By 1927, the Interstate Commerce Commission had seen enough disturbing injury reports and crew fatalities. Camelback locomotives were officially banned from new construction across the entire United States. The design placed the engineer directly above the roaring firebox, exposed to extreme heat and completely isolated from the firemen who worked on a tiny exposed platform at the rear of the locomotive. Communication between crew members was nearly impossible during operation. The fireman could not warn the engineer of developing problems. The engineer could not see signals being passed from the rear. Accident rates for Camelback locomotives ran twice as high as conventional designs. Existing Camelbacks were allowed to operate until natural retirement, but no new ones could ever be built again. The ban effectively killed an entire locomotive design philosophy because its power came at too high a human cost. General Electric's U50 locomotives were diesel experiments gone terribly wrong on American railroads. They were built between 1963 and 1965 for Union Pacific and Southern Pacific. These 5,000 horsepower twin-engine monsters rode on four-axle trucks similar to those used on earlier gas turbine locomotives. Their power output was certainly impressive for the era. The track damage was absolutely catastrophic. The four-axle truck design concentrated weight in ways that hammered rails and destroyed track geometry wherever they operated across the system. Curves were particularly vulnerable to this damage. The U50 locomotives would literally spread rails apart as their rigid trucks fought against the curvature, forcing railheads outward under tremendous lateral forces. Both Union Pacific and Southern Pacific quickly restricted these locomotives from secondary trackage, where lighter rail could not withstand the punishment. Southern Pacific banned them from several mainline segments after repeated and costly derailments. By the early 1970s, most U50 locomotives were stored or retired, despite having years of theoretical service life remaining. General Electric learned its lesson, and subsequent locomotive designs used more track-friendly six-axle trucks instead. The Virginian Railway's XA-class triplex locomotive represented the absolute extreme of steam locomotive engineering ambition pushed beyond practical limits. Built by Baldwin in 1916, this massive 2-8-8-8 four-wheel arrangement featured 3 sets of driving wheels, with one complete set powered under the tender itself. The huge locomotive generated 176,000 pounds of starting tractive effort, theoretically enough to pull a train nearly 5 miles long along level track. But reality intervened immediately upon delivery. The triplex could not generate enough steam to feed all 3 engine units simultaneously at any useful speed. Above 10 miles per hour, steam pressure collapsed completely, and the locomotive became nearly powerless. The Virginian quickly banned the XA from regular road service and relegated it to pushing duties on the steepest grades only. Even there, its usefulness was severely limited by design flaws. As coal and water were consumed from the tender, the rear engine unit lost adhesion weight dramatically. Traction from that third engine set literally decreased as the locomotive worked. After just 4 years of problematic service, the sole Virginian triplex was scrapped in 1920. Baldwin's Centipede locomotives seemed like the future when they debuted in 1945, with tremendous fanfare from the railroad industry press. These 6,000 horsepower passenger diesels rode on a unique 2D plus D two-wheel arrangement, featuring 2 4-axle-powered trucks with unpowered pilot trucks at each end for stability. Pennsylvania Railroad, Seaboard Airline, and National Railways of Mexico all bought them, expecting revolutionary performance on their main lines. What they got was track destruction on an industrial scale. The Centipede's 4-axle-powered trucks created lateral forces that pushed rails out of alignment wherever they ran at speed. The massive 588,000-pound locomotives literally shoved tracks sideways on curves, creating dangerous conditions. Pennsylvania Railroad quickly banned them from routes with lighter rail or tight curvature. Seaboard restricted them to specific mainline corridors. Even on approved routes, crews reported feeling the locomotives fighting the rails at every curve they encountered. By the early 1960s, all Centipedes were retired or scrapped. Their promising power output was overwhelmed by a devastating tendency to destroy track that could not be engineered away. Union Pacific's DD-35 and DD-35. Locomotives represented the railroad's continuing quest for maximum horsepower on the rails during the diesel transition. These 5,000 horsepower diesels placed 2 GP35 prime movers on a single massive frame, riding on the same problematic 4-axle trucks as the earlier gas turbines that had proven so destructive to track. Union Pacific ordered 30 cabless booster units and 15 units with cabs between 1963 and 1965, hoping for better results this time. The track damage was immediate and severe across the system. The DD-35s concentrated their 470,000 pounds on just 8 axles, creating point loads that overwhelmed standard track construction throughout the railroad. Union Pacific was forced to ban them from most secondary lines and many branches where tracks simply could not handle the punishment. Even on mainline service, strict operating restrictions limited their usefulness considerably. The units spent much of their time assigned to specific heavy haul corridors where track was maintained to higher standards just for them. By the early 1980s, most DD-35 units had been retired. The railroad had learned that raw power meant nothing if the track could not survive the passage. Union Pacific's legendary big boy locomotives were the largest steam locomotives ever built, weighing 1.2 million pounds with tender. Yet even these famous monsters faced restrictions that limited where they could actually operate on the railroad. Built between 1941 and 1944, The 25 big boys were designed specifically for the brutal grades between Ogden and Green River, where they could haul 3,600-ton trains over the Wasatch Mountains. But here is what most people do not realize. Big boys were banned from most of Union Pacific's network. Their 67,800-pound axle loading and 132-foot length prohibited operation on countless branch lines and secondary routes. Many yards could not turn them. Numerous bridges could not support them. The railroad had to maintain separate locomotive pools and carefully dispatch these giants to approved territory only. Even the special routes required constant track maintenance to handle the punishment these behemoths delivered with every revolution of their 68-inch drivers. When Big Boy 4014 operates in preservation today, route surveys require months of advanced planning. Every bridge must be evaluated, every curve assessed. The power that made them legendary also made them prisoners of their own massive size. The Pennsylvania Railroad S1 locomotive was an Art Deco masterpiece, and it was simply too large for the railroad world it was built to dominate. It was designed by legendary industrial designer Raymond Loewy and built in 1939. This stunning 6446 duplex drive locomotive stretched an incredible 140 feet from pilot to tender coupler. It was designed to cruise at 100 miles per hour with 1,200-ton passenger trains, pushing the boundaries of steam technology further than ever before. The S1 was an engineering marvel and a complete operational failure. At 1,060,000 pounds, the S1 was banned from virtually every passenger terminal on the Pennsylvania Railroad system. Most turntables simply could not accommodate its extreme length. Many platform tracks could not handle its weight. The locomotive's rigid frame made it prone to derailment on any curve tighter than the gentlest mainline sweeps. The Pennsylvania Railroad restricted it to just one route, the relatively straight and flat Chicago to Crestline, Ohio segment where track conditions could support it. Even there, problems mounted constantly. Wheel slippage plagued the locomotive because its weight distribution left some drivers underloaded. By 1949, after just 10 years of problematic service, the sole S1 was scrapped. Union Pacific's gas turbine electric locomotives were the most powerful single-unit locomotives ever operated in North America. Between 1952 and 1961, UP ran 3 generations of these jet-powered beasts, with the final series producing an incredible 8,500 horsepower each. They consumed bunker C fuel, heated to 200 degrees Fahrenheit, and expelled exhaust at nearly 850 degrees through stacks that roared at volumes exceeding 150 decibels. Here's where the bans started piling up across the system. Cities along UP's mainline began prohibiting the turbines from operating within their limits. The noise complaints were overwhelming. The heat from the exhaust could blister paint on nearby structures and actually melted asphalt in rail yards where they idled too long. California communities were particularly vocal, and the turbines were banned from urban areas across the entire state. But the problems extended beyond noise. The 4-axle trucks caused the same track damage issues that plagued other heavy power. By 1970, rising fuel costs and accumulating restrictions made the turbines uneconomical. All 55 locomotives were retired and scrapped, their tremendous power silenced by the communities they served. Southern Pacific's AC-12 cab-forward locomotives were unique, configured to solve a deadly problem in the Sierra Nevada. By placing the cab ahead of the boiler, crews could breathe fresh air instead of choking on exhaust fumes in the railroad's many snowsheds and tunnels. Built between 1943 and 1944, these oil-burning 4882 articulated locomotives were among the most powerful ever operated on Southern Pacific's mountainous mainline routes across the High Sierra. But their unusual configuration created restrictions of its own. The cab forwards were banned from most of Southern Pacific's system outside California and Nevada. Eastern connecting railroads refused to accept them in interchange because their maintenance requirements were completely different from conventional power. The backwards operation confused crews unfamiliar with the type, creating safety concerns. Even on Southern Pacific's own lines, the cab forwards were restricted to specific routes with adequate servicing facilities. Their oil-burning configuration meant they could not operate on coal-burning territories. When dieselization arrived in the 1950s, the 256 cab forwards were quickly retired despite their proven effectiveness in tunnel service. The Eerie Railroad's 28882 triplexes were even more ambitious than the Virginians' failed experiment with the same concept. Built by Baldwin in 1914, these monsters featured 3 engine sets generating a combined 160,000 pounds of tractive effort. Eerie ordered 3 of them, hoping they would revolutionize heavy freight operations on the railroad. The revolution failed almost immediately. Like their Virginian cousin, the Eerie triplexes could not generate enough steam to power all 3 engine sets at any useful road speed. But Eerie discovered additional problems that doomed the design. The couplers could not handle the stress of what these locomotives could theoretically pull. When the triplexes started a heavy train, something had to give, and it was usually the drawbar or the couplings behind them. Eerie quickly banned the triplexes from road service entirely, relegating them to pusher duty, where their massive starting tractive effort could be useful without stressing couplers. Even that limited role was problematic. The locomotives were unreliable and required constant maintenance. By 1929, all 3 Eerie triplexes had been scrapped, their excessive power literally too much for the railroad's infrastructure to handle. The Chesapeake and Ohio M1 steam turbine locomotives represented an audacious attempt to combine steam power with electric drive technology in a revolutionary package. Built in 1947 and 1948, these 3 massive locomotives used coal-fired boilers to generate steam that powered turbines, which in turn drove electric generators feeding traction motors on every axle. Weighing 1.2 million pounds each, they were supposed to be the future of American mainline power, but instead, they became expensive monuments to failed ambition. The M1s were banned from almost every Chesapeake and Ohio branch line immediately upon delivery. Their extreme weight required mainline-only operation at all times. But even on approved routes, problems multiplied rapidly. Coal dust contaminated the turbine blades. The generators overheated constantly. The complex systems required specialized maintenance that overtaxed shop facilities. The locomotives spent more time in the repair shops than on the road. Each M1 cost nearly as much to maintain as 3 conventional locomotives combined. By 1950, less than 3 years after entering service, all 3 M1s were sidelined and eventually scrapped. Their coal-fired turbine technology died with them. Norfolk and Western's John Henry was the last gasp of steam turbine technology in American railroading. It was a final experiment that proved the technology simply could not work. Built in 1954, this 175,000-pound tractive effort monster used a coal-fired steam turbine driving electric traction motors. Norfolk and Western hoped it would combine the cheapness of coal with the efficiency of electric drive. The John Henry was restricted from most Norfolk and Western trackage from its first run. At 161 feet long and over 1.2 million pounds, it was banned from branches, prohibited on lighter main lines, and it could not negotiate yards with standard turntables. The few routes it could operate on revealed deeper problems. Coal ash infiltrated the turbine mechanism relentlessly, wearing down precision components at alarming rates. The electrical systems failed in the harsh operating environment of Appalachian coal country. Crews nicknamed it a rolling power plant because it required the same level of technical expertise to operate and maintain. After less than 3 years of problematic service, Norfolk and Western quietly retired the John Henry in 1957. The locomotive had proven that coal-fired turbine electric technology simply could not work in railroad applications, regardless of how much power it could produce. The Pennsylvania Railroad's Q2 Class 4464 duplex drive locomotives were designed to be the ultimate freight haulers on America's busiest railroad. Built between 1944 and 1945, These 26 locomotives featured two sets of driving wheels powered by separate cylinders, generating 8,000 horsepower at speed. They were supposed to replace articulated locomotives while offering better high-speed performance on PRR's demanding mainlines. The Q2s were immediately banned from most PRR branch lines because they were 107 feet long and weighed 619,000 pounds. Even on mainline service, problems emerged constantly. The duplex drive arrangement caused severe wheel slippage when starting heavy trains. The rear engine would slip while the front engine pulled, creating dangerous lurching movements. Crews learned to handle them carefully, but the reputation for unreliability spread quickly through the railroad. Engine failures were frequent, and maintenance costs soared. By 1949, just 5 years after introduction, PRR began sidelining the Q2s in favor of diesels that did not destroy themselves trying to start heavy trains. All 26 were scrapped by 1951, their innovative design defeated by fundamental engineering flaws. The Southern Railway's massive 210-4 Texas types were among the heaviest non-articulated steam locomotives ever built for American railroads. From 1928 to 1930, Southern rostered 44 of these locomotives, each weighing 480,000 pounds for heavy freight service across the system. Their 63-inch drivers and 84,000 pounds of tractive effort made them formidable coal haulers on demanding mountain grades through the Appalachians. But that power came with severe limitations across the railroad's network. Southern's Texas types were banned from most of the railroad's secondary main lines and all branch lines because of their massive axle loading. The railroad had to maintain separate locomotive assignments, keeping these big engines on approved heavy routes only. Even the approved routes required constant track upgrades and bridge reinforcement. Curves had to be super elevated beyond normal standards. Rail had to be maintained to tighter tolerances. When the Texas types rolled through, they announced their passage by causing track damage that required repair crews to follow. By the 1950s, Southern was happy to diesel these high-maintenance monsters. Their power was undeniable, but the infrastructure cost of supporting it had become unbearable. The Union Pacific DDA-40X Centennial locomotives were the longest and most powerful diesel locomotives ever built when they emerged from EMD's LaGrange plant between 1969 and 1971. At 98 feet long and 6,600 horsepower, these 47 locomotives were built specifically to celebrate the centennial of the Transcontinental Railroad. They represented everything Union Pacific loved about massive power. They also represented everything other railroads feared. The DDA-40X was immediately banned from interchange service with virtually every connecting railroad in North America. Their extreme length made them impossible to turn on standard turntables. Many yards could not accommodate them in their classification tracks. Bridges and curves that could handle their weight could not handle their length. The locomotives that were supposed to roam the continent were trapped on Union Pacific's own rails. Even there, restrictions accumulated quickly. The Centennials could not fit in numerous maintenance facilities. They were prohibited from secondary routes. Their twin-engine design proved maintenance-intensive. By 1985, Union Pacific had retired most of the fleet. The most powerful diesel locomotives ever built had been defeated by their own dimensions, too big for the railroad world they were meant to dominate. And that's all, folks. These locomotives prove that power without infrastructure is just expensive scrap metal. Don't forget to subscribe. Here is another video I have specially selected for you. See you next time.